I've chosen the behaviourist theory perspective through which to examine the system-level assessment practice of NAPLAN. NAPLAN and behaviourist theory are both criticised for failing to appreciate the affects of cognitive function, such as thoughts, opinions, feelings, and emotional responses, nor to incorporate constructivist techniques into practical applications. However, these criticisms rest outside the scope of this critique, as NAPLAN is to be analysed only through a lens of behaviourist theory and its assessment applications. In the late 1600s, John Locke introduces the concept of the mind as a tabula rasa or blank slate at birth. Then, beginning in the late 1800s, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov develops his classical conditioning theory, which introduces the concept of a stimulus-response learning process. Around the same time, a contemporary of Pavlov's, John Watson, publishes Psychology as the Behaviourist Views It, in which he states behaviour is purely objective. Another contemporary of theirs, Edward Thorndike, develops the law of effect, which introduces the notion of choice to conditioning, where both animal and human subjects decide how to act based upon perceived consequences of that action. In the 1950s, B.F. Skinner then develops Thorndike's concept into the theory of operant conditioning and the concept of shaping or gradual modification of behaviour through external reinforcement. Learning theory can be expressed as a spectrum that at one extreme is purely objective and at the other highly subjective. Behavioural theory sits at the very tip of the objective side of the spectrum. In behavioural theory, learning is experientially based. The individual must interact with an external stimulus. Learning must be translated into an observable change in behaviour. It must be measurable through comparison to the individual's prior behaviour and/or an explicitly stated purpose or goal. Cognitive theory rests on the opposite end of the spectrum to behavioral theory. Learning theorists who consider that learning happens through interactions of both environmental stimuli and thinking are placed somewhere along the length of the spectrum. Assessment can be defined as educational attainment constructs, the main function being the setting out of what students should know and be able to do. Therefore, it is arguable that all assessment practices in educational settings have their roots in behaviourist theory. In order to make a judgment of learning, we must be able to observe that something has changed and to be able to measure change against a base standard. Behavioural theory is performance-based, as is assessment practice. No matter what the purpose or construct of the assessment, its validity and reliability relies on behaviourist theory principles of measurability, observability, and the provision of explicitly stated goals or outcomes. Behaviourist theory emphasises the processes for basic skills acquisition and goal setting. However, the students are at risk of losing this knowledge and the skills developed, if not practiced enough over time. Incorporation of cognitive dimensions will bring behavioural theory into alignment with current fields of thought, ensuring assessment practices are more valid and reliable. NAPLAN is a nationally based assessment program for all schools in Australia for students in grades 3, 5, 7 and 9, approximately 1 million students who sit the tests across the country on the same days once a year, in May. Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority manages, develops and moderates NAPLAN in consultation with literacy and numeracy experts. The Test Administration Authority in Queensland is the Queensland Curriculum Assessment Authority, who coordinates the administration, the marking and the reporting for the state of Queensland. At the school level, the principal and the teaching staff administer the tests. NAPLAN reflects a snapshot in time and is based on the nationally proficient standards for mathematics and English. The literacy tests assess reading, writing, spelling, grammar and punctuation, while the numeracy tests assess number and algebra, measurement and geometry, and statistics and probability. The tests use multiple choice, constructed response, and long answer stimulus questions. The tests are conducted every year in May, except for 2020, which was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The results are released in August to September to schools and students, and the official results are published in December on the My School website. Individuals' test results are mapped on scales. Students and parents use these to drive discussion with teachers as to the students' progress. Teachers can identify struggling students and excelling students and differentiate their teaching strategies. Schools can identify strengths and weaknesses in their programs and set goals. Governments and other system leaders use results to monitor the student performance, understand which schools are struggling or thriving, and whether interventions have worked, and where to allocate resources. In terms of strengths of NAPLAN, as seen through a behaviourist theoretical perspective, NAPLAN correlates strongly with the behaviourist principles of observability and measurability. It is an outcomes-based approach to assessment where parameters and standards have been explicitly defined. Students can employ behaviourist-based strategies such as test familiarization, memorization, and practice to enhance their test results. Governments can enact policies designed to reach the greatest numbers and align practices to ensure standards can be maintained. In terms of the weaknesses of NAPLAN, from a behaviourist perspective, the data, indeed any data, is open to misinterpretation and can therefore be misapplied. These factors are always down to human infallibility and are present in all situations where generalizations and interpretations are made, and thus are included here as a weakness for their general relevance. It has been suggested that NAPLAN, used as a diagnostic tool, can interfere with classroom assessment practices that are more directly applicable for this purpose. Thus, it can be considered out of step with teacher assessment practices. There are opportunities that NAPLAN represents. NAPLAN results can help plan and adjust national curriculum standards by highlighting which areas are potentially weak and which are thriving, based on how the most numbers of students are performing for each strand. Teachers can adjust their classroom test practice procedures if NAPLAN results indicate their students are not achieving. This, in the long run, can assist students over the course of their schooling, as test-based assessments are commonly applied over the course of every student's school life. Teachers may also identify where to differentiate for those students who either struggle or excel. The great threat to NAPLAN comes from the lack of appreciation for behaviourist practices and principles amongst proponents of more moderate approaches to teaching, learning, and assessment. These approaches seek more reflection of cognitive and constructivist principles, requiring the incorporation of students' creativity and thoughtfulness in the design and structure of assessment practices. In conclusion, NAPLAN and behaviourist theory strongly align in terms of performance-based measurability and observability. NAPLAN and behaviourist theory are both data-driven for goal setting and are very much standards-based as methods for understanding the level of learning that has occurred and that desirably needs to occur to be considered successful. Thank you for listening.